And Kevin Durant stunned a lot of people, Rob, recently when he made a comment about basketball in the 1980s and 90s not being really any more physical than basketball today.
I didn't realize he played in the 80s and 90s. I'm interested. I didn't know how long his career was.
All right. Well, here he is, Rob, with his comment.
I go back and watch a lot of that 90s film, 80s stuff, and they play physical, but I just think they got away with a lot of flagrant fouls, and I think that's why they call their era more physical than ours, because we play physical here too. It's more space, but guys play physical. We got strong, athletic guys here too. But I watched some of those games. The paint was clear. Nobody was getting touched. It wasn't a lot of help defense, but you did get a lot of flagrant fouls that didn't result into fines or getting kicked out the game. So it just seemed like, it was a little tougher.
I'm going to do a Chris Broussard. Stop it, KD. What are you talking about? There was a lot of space, and you get touched now? Really, Chris? You can't even touch anybody defensively. You can't put your hands on them or they're going to the free throw line. Come on, dude. Where's the pushback? Who was interviewing KD?
That's to say, great. You say that a lot, but this was his own podcast, but he got one or two guys with him.
But then yes,
he got one other guy with him.
Yes, man, Chris.
For no pushback on that. And I don't know, Rob G, did he get any pushback? Anybody ask? Okay, come on.
Well, in fairness, his co-host, I believe, is his age or even a little bit younger.
It's fine. So. You don't have – look, I'm going to say this. And I have a lot of respect for Kevin Durant's basketball knowledge. I don't think he's just one of these guys that's great at basketball but doesn't know the history of the game to some degree. I mean, he really is a student of the game. He watches – not only new tape, but as he said, old tape. He talked about watching Kobe, watching Jordan, today, like consistently watching them in their moves. He's put out his own teams of who he thinks the 5 best players are and ever and things like I respect KD, and obviously LeBron's there as well, as guys that really do take the knowledge and history of the game seriously. And that is why this comment completely baffled me, because first, number one, KD contradicted himself in his own statement. He said, I don't think it was more physical. They just got away with a lot more flagrant fouls. Well, that in and of itself makes it more physical.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, what is a flagrant foul right now was just a regular old foul, or you play through it back in the day. I mean, they got called, so it was like a foul. You know what? There was no timeout. There was no let the refs look at it for 5 minutes and decide, are you going to be ejected immediately? Is it a flagrant 1, a flagrant 2? None of that. It was, all right, get up and get to the free throw line and let's play on.
The saying, no blood, no foul, Chris.
Right.
No blood, no foul.
That in and of itself, Rob, made it more physical. So that's number one. What is Katie talking about, number one? Number two, this really, because that was just, I guess he misspoke. I don't know. He didn't understand. He was actually contradicting himself with that statement. But this really, Rob, he said the lane was open and there really wasn't much contact. That makes me say, what games were you watching? You're watching the All-Star games? Is that what you're watching, the All-Star game from 1986? Because if you watch 80s and 90s and even to some degree early 2000s basketball, the first thing that will strike you is how much more the game was focused around the paint. And I talk about it all the time, Rob. When you drove to the basket, there were 5, 6 people in the paint, defenders and your teammates. And you just had to fit. That was like accepted at all levels. I wasn't no high-level basketball player, but in high school and the college level I played, it was accepted. And nowadays, if a team has a one post-up player, the first concern is, well, he might clog up the paint. They act like you can't drive today unless it's a 5-out offense. And so for him to say that the paint was open, Rob, that was the most baffling statement of this whole soliloquy he said.
Because it just tells you, like, you negate everything else after you say that. I mean, I can't even listen to you. Like if you want to make a case, Chris, and say something or make a case, but to say that it wasn't physical and there was nobody in the lane and all that, like how?
Right.
Like how? I was covering the NBA. I started in 1986, 87. Don't tell me. I watched them. What?
Everything was inside of the three-point line. And everything was right around the painted area. Everything. And so, again, when you went into the paint, man, you were far from alone. And now there might be 1, 2, maybe 3 guys in there for the most part. But it is so much more wide open. Rob, that would be like saying, I mean, in the 90s, they didn't use running backs any more than they do today. Running backs really were no more valuable.
Exactly.
They didn't have bell cows.
And then we would
anymore.
bring Barry Sanders and Emmitt Smith for you to have a conversation. Stop it. We talk about it all the time. Patrick Mahomes, Chris, almost threw 60 passes in a game. We said, go back and look at Terry Bradshaw. He threw 60 passes in 4 games.
Right. Absolutely. It's like saying, Rob, the NFL, quarterbacks were just as protected back then as they are now. No, that is the type of statement that does make, and I do think KD's watching film. I take him at his word on that. I just don't know how you can make this statement. I'm sorry. Like, this statement makes absolutely no sense. Now, if KD wants to argue, I don't know if he would, but if he wants to kind of make an argument for today's game being just as challenging, I think he would argue this, just as challenging, just as physically taxing as it was in the 80s and 90s, that's cool. Because, and Joe Dumars, Rob, said this recently, and Kerry Kittle tells us all the time, the game is very taxing today. And in many ways, more so because the floor is so spread.
And you have to cover more ground.
You have to cover more, right.
Exactly.
Even big men, like a center, and Anthony Davis, who years in the 80s and 90s would have been relegated to playing within the paint. He wouldn't
have been out on the perimeter.
Yes.
He wouldn't have been on the perimeter fouling the guy in the corner
he
for a
wouldn't
three.
Have been doing that.
Seriously,
Right. That's
he wouldn't
a
have
good
been
point.
there.
But yeah, and so so it's just different. Nowadays, you do have to cover more ground, which is, of course, physically taxing. Back then, you would get hit a lot more. There was a lot more contact. Heck, you could hand check back then. You can hand check, just that in and of itself. And so if you say, yeah, that was physically taxing because you could hand guard and guys could hit you a lot harder. And today it's more physically taxing because you cover more ground, then we can come to, an agreement on that. But like you said, Rob, that statement about the lane being wide open, it just nullifies everything he said. It really does.
You just can't buy into it. And Chris, I just remember, I covered Charles Oakley when he was with the Knicks and guys like that. And you came into the paint, you're going to feel it. There's no way. They didn't part the Red Sea and be like, oh, we don't want to foul them. I wrote a story that I used, Chris, in my class at USC. And the lead was a playoff game between the Knicks and the 76ers. And the lead of the story was a sidebar in this game, and it was Charles Barkley wanted to call 911 last night. Chris, I'm going to send it to you. And it was about how physical Oakley was, and his first quote was something like, like Oakley roughed me up, I wanted to call the police. So that was my lead and his quote.
Right.
And it was about how physical the game was. Oakley wasn't thrown out. You know what I mean? There was no technical fouls or anything like that. It was hard physical basketball. And that was like in the 80s, late 80s, Chris, when I wrote that story. And that was how physical it was.
Now, and we're not even saying, we got to go back to that. No, I like, the spacing and things like that. But this statement just makes no sense. It really made no sense. And Rob, as you said, where's the pushback? Like when we get to that point, Rob, because a lot of the athletes, I don't think Draymond does, but a lot of the athletes who have podcasts, Rob, they have a partner, right? And that's the partner's job. Man. I get it that he's your boy, but if he's really your boy, you and I are boys. So we can push back on each other.
You got to be able to have some
If that's your boy, he should be able to push back. And I don't know if these dudes don't know about the history of the game. Rob G said they're the same age. Then why are you speaking on it? And so I think that would take these podcasts to the next level. Okay, you don't want to answer the pushback from, traditional journalists. Well, you answer the pushback from your boy. That's what would take some of these podcasts and the new media, Rob, to the next level.